Hey you guys, welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be setting up a Welt Pocket. This is the overall look on how it looks like. It's super easy, follow along, rewind if needed. If you have not subscribed to the channel, definitely do so. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing we're going to do is measure how deep we want the pocket to be. So I decided to go with 4 inches. Therefore, from there you can fold it in half just so that you can get the actual center of the fabric. Since this is a sample, it's going to go in the sample book. I was able to do that. But when you're making a garment, the pattern would have already have its placement, or you're the one that's dictating where the placement's going to be. So just place it accordingly. Make sure that you use your tracing wheel and your carbon paper to mark it. But here I'm just finding the center and I'm adding a little mark just so that I can pinpoint exactly how wide it's going to be. I decided to go with 4 inches, therefore the center would be exactly 2 inches in between. From there, you can go ahead and open it and use your tracing wheel along with your I'm forgetting what it's called. Your carbon paper. I'm having a brain fart today. Use your carbon paper and tracing wheel so that you can mark your actual welt pocket opening. It is going to be a half an inch big. It's going to be a half an inch big and it'll be 4 inches wide. So the overall length for the welt pocket, I ended up coming up with 9 and an eighth of an inch. But it should technically be 9 because the pocket depth was supposed to be 4 inches. And when you duplicate that, it becomes 4 plus 4 is 8. And then the welt depth is a half an inch. And you're supposed to duplicate that. So a half plus a half is 1. And 4 plus 4 is 8. So that should have been just 9 inches. But I went overboard just a little bit. And it's not a big deal. So you should have 9 inches in length for the pocket. And your width should be 5 inches. Your welt pocket should be centered in between. So you're going to have 4 inches of the welt pocket with a half inch overlap so that you're able to stitch over it and make sure that you seal in your pocket. Now, once you're done, you should be able to fold this over. Fold your pocket in half, and that will give you your top crease for where the very top of the welt opening is going to be, or the marking for your welt pocket is going to be. So be sure you fold it in half, and from there you can measure a half an inch, and that'll give you the bottom of the welt pocket. And then your marking in the middle would be a 1/4 of an inch. Once you transfer your markings over onto the fabric with your tracing wheel and carbon paper, you can go ahead and line them up. Now what you're going to do is line up the right side of the pocket to the right side of the shell fabric. So be sure when you're making your markings, they're coming out on both sides. Now your fabric, once you fold it, you should be able to have a crease there that shows you exactly where the top where the actual top is. But if you don't have a crease, be sure that the marking is showing up on both sides. You're going to line it up exactly how it is on your fabric. So the top should match the top of the welt pocket and the bottom should match the bottom. Go ahead and add some pins to secure it. As you're adding your pins, be sure that the markings are matching up on the right side of the pocket and the right side of the actual shell fabric. Make sure that they are lining up, because once they shift out of place, it becomes a little bit harder for you to pivot and maneuver. But once that's done, you are going to sew the perimeter of that stitch. So I wouldn't start in the corner, start right in the middle, at the top or the bottom, and then just sew in a perimeter. You're gonna sew, make sure you sink your needle. Once you get to a corner, pivot and turn. Before you start pivoting and turning, make sure that that needle is synced in place. Otherwise, depending on the machine, sometimes your machine is able to keep going if it's not, even if the presser foot is not down or whatever. So this machine, it will not move unless the presser foot is down. But I've seen some machines where it'll keep going regardless of the presser foot being, down or whatever. So keep that in mind. Just make sure that your needle is synced in when you get to that corner and you're getting ready to pivot. Once you are done with your perimeter stitch, be sure to clean any excess thread that you have left over so that we can continue on to the next part. It's really good that you clean up your threads as you sew because it alleviates from having, a bigger mess in the end. But the 1/4 of an inch line that we had made in the middle, we are going to clip right on that. So what you can do is fold your pocket in half and try to clip right in the middle. When you get to the end, you are going to clip into those corners as if you are making a triangle. You are going to make a triangle. Just cut as close to the actual stitch line as possible without cutting the stitch line. If you do cut the stitch line, the only way to fix it is to create a bigger welt pocket. So cutting beyond, not cutting, but sewing like 1/8 of an inch beyond where the original mark was, just so that it stays closed and it stays in place. But don't do that. Just make sure that you're cutting to the corner and you're not cutting the stitch line, and you'll be fine. Once that's done, you are going to turn your fabric into the other side. So you can hand press it just so that you make your original crease and everything's staying nice and clean. If you have an iron, it's always good to have an iron close by. That way you are ironing as you go, but hand pressing is at times is beneficial and it's quicker. As you can see here, I did not reach that little mark, and it's okay. We're just going to keep going. It will make a difference in the end because it means that my pocket will be 1/8 of an inch smaller than what I wanted. But let's be honest, 1/8 of an inch is not that big of a deal. Well, at least not to me. So you guys, this next part is extremely important. So please follow along. You are going to fold that seam allowance, the one that we did that was 1/4 of an inch upwards, and fold the actual pocket of the fabric over it so that you make a crease on where the actual welt or folding is going to be in the middle. Once you have that crease, if you have your iron close, definitely iron it, but you can also hand press it like I usually do. Fold that seam allowance back down and keep that crease in place so that you make your first portion of the welt pocket. Once you have that, go ahead and grab some pins and pin that in place. Okay, you are pretty much making a zigzag. As you can see right on the edge, you're going to make a zigzag with the fabric. Hold it in place and pin your seam allowance down so that it stays in place. That way you can sew it down. I don't know if you remember from our last video where I was using the double-sided interfacing, but this little section right here would be the perfect place for you to place that double-sided interfacing when you iron it down. That way your first portion of the welt pocket is going to stay in place and it's not going anywhere. You can definitely double check the back side to make sure that, your fold is definitely in place. But go ahead and grab your pins, sis, and pin it down. That way you can sew across. The very first portion of the welt pocket that we did was the bottom. right? We just went ahead and we pinned the bottom portion down. Now we're going to do the top. You're going to repeat that same process. So first you're going to flip the actual shell of the pocket over, fold that seam allowance upwards so that you get the exact measurement of where that welt pocket, the folding needs to be. Press it down with your finger, or again, if you have your iron, go ahead and use it. That way everything is laying down nice and smooth. And then from there, once you have that crease in place, you need to fold it back over so that you can fold your seam allowance back down. All right, flip it over, make your crease, and then from there, fold your seam allowance down. And you're gonna fold back down on your original crease that you made. That way you keep the placement. Use your iron if needed. If you have double siding interfacing, you could slip some right there in place. That way you know your fold is not going to shift, your crease is not going to shift out of place. I went ahead and I added some pins there. The pins are through and through in the fold, and it's going to cause it to not shift. But if you have the interfacing, it works better and it prevents movement. This is how it looks on the other side. You guys, we are moving right along. We are almost done. This is like the second to last part, I promise. So now we're going to go back to the bottom, the very first step that we did. And we're going to sew straight across. You need to make sure that you are sewing on that seam allowance right above the stitch line. If you want, you could stitch right over it, but I made the secondary stitch across. Just sew right across, backstitch if need be. Well, no, definitely backstitch, not if need be. You need to backstitch because you don't want this to come apart. Sew it all the way across and backstitch towards the end. As you can see, it's only going over the seam allowance. Now that we're done with the bottom, we're gonna move over to the top. The top will be extremely easy, just like we did with the bottom. You're going to repeat that same process. As a reminder though, always try to clean off your threads as you go, just so that you don't have so much cleanup, so much trimming in the end. But again, you are going to you're going to sew across that seam allowance. Adjust your pins if needed. Make sure that they are in place before you start sewing. You guys, we are almost done. Okay, so this is how it's looking. The welt pocket opening is already done, okay? Your pocket is pretty much 90% done, and we just need to close it off so that it's functional and you don't have a big old hole. This is how it's looking on the back side, and the front is looking pretty good. So if there's any adjustments that are needed to be made, right now would be the best point for you to do it, because once you close it off, there won't be that much access, and yeah, it's just not going to be that easy. So flip it over to the right side so that you're able to see the actual opening, and what you're going to do is fold over the shell of the fabric. That way you're able to see the pocket, right? You're going to fold it over like so, just so that you're able to see, and you'll start sewing. You're going to start from one side, back stitching over that little triangular piece, sewing all the way down and around, keeping that seam allowance, and then you're going to come back up to the other side. All right, there goes that 1/4 of an inch that I went over. Yes, it's coming back for me. But yes, you're going to keep that seam allowance, and then you're going to come back around and back stitch here, and that will close off your pocket, and darling, you are done. Okay, here we go. subscribed to this video, definitely, if you have not subscribed to my channel, definitely do so. Subscribe, share, like, comment down below. If you have any questions on processes on how to put anything together, definitely shoot me up on Instagram. If not, you can comment down below and I will do my best to respond. But this is the finale, the final thing on how, the final way on how to make this Welt Pocket. This is literally the last step, and we're done. So I guess that means I will see you next time. Peace, love, and happiness. Happy sewing.